The chandelier lights glared down like judgment. A hush had fallen across the grand hotel lobby, broken only by the snap of metal cuffs. A woman in a crimson dress stood still, wrists bound, her dignity intact though her freedom seemed stolen. Two officers flanked her. One searched her purse with sterile hands, the other glanced at her as though she were already guilty. Beside them, a woman in a dark blazer rifled through her belongings, lips pressed, hunting for proof of a crime that didn't exist. And then laughter. A sharp, triumphant laugh from across the marble floor. The manager, polished in his navy suit, couldn't resist twisting the knife. He leaned just close enough for every guest in earshot to catch his words. "You won't get away with being a thief." Gasps rippled. A few phones rose discreetly into the air. Guests shifted in their seats, unsure if they were watching a scandal or a setup. The woman in red didn't flinch. Her gaze was steady, her silence heavier than any outburst. For a moment, it looked like she was absorbing every insult, every accusation, anchoring herself against the tide closing in. The officer turned up a lipstick tube, a wallet, a hotel keycard. "Empty," he muttered. Still, the manager smirked as though evidence didn't matter. People like her always think they can slip through. His tone was loud enough for the chandeliers to carry it across the hall. And that was when the first whisper began. "Wait, isn't that the owner?" A second voice hushed it quickly, fearful, uncertain. But the spark had lit. The crowd didn't know it yet, but they were seconds away from witnessing a reversal they'd never forget. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. Her silence was not surrender, it was warning. Hours earlier, the grand lobby of the Horizon Crown had been calm, a place of velvet chairs, golden trim, and whispers softened by marble. Guests moved in and out, never guessing the storm about to unfold in the very room they called sanctuary. She arrived alone. No entourage, no briefcase, no flash of designer logos. Just a crimson dress, heels that clicked once for every decision she had ever made, and a quiet presence that seemed to claim space without asking. To anyone watching, she was simply another guest. Perhaps wealthy, perhaps not. But what no one saw was the truth. This was her building. Every chandelier above, every column polished to a mirror shine, every uniformed employee, they were all under her name. The irony was brutal. Years of ownership had taught her one thing. Appearances mattered less than timing. She chose to arrive without announcement, without her assistant, without the protective shield of status. It was deliberate. It was a test. She wanted to see how her own staff treated the unseen, the unrecognized, the guest who didn't wear wealth like a costume. But the moment she reached the front desk, she felt the shift. Eyes scanning her, tone sharpened, posture stiffening. The manager barely offered a greeting before asking for her ID with a voice that sounded more like suspicion than procedure. The two clerks beside him mirrored his doubt, glances exchanged like whispers too sharp to miss. Her voice was steady. "Reservation under Carter, penthouse suite." The words landed with weight, yet instead of respect, they triggered disbelief. The clerk frowned, the manager smirked, and the doubt in the air grew thick enough to choke on. She slid her card across the desk. Black, embossed, unmistakable. He lifted it between two fingers, as though contact itself were contamination. "Strange," he muttered loud enough for others to hear. "This looks suspicious." Behind her, a couple waiting in line shifted uncomfortably. Another guest raised a brow, sensing something ugly blooming in real time. Still, she didn't flinch. Not then. Not ever. What the staff never realized was that this lobby had been her battlefield before. At 24, she walked into a boutique hotel in Atlanta, exhausted from meetings, only to be told her reservation didn't exist. She spent that night in her car. That humiliation turned into her first blueprint for a hospitality empire. And now, years later, the same prejudice echoed back to her like an old wound reopened. Only this time, the ending would be different. The tension broke with a sharp click. A button pressed beneath the desk, subtle to some, obvious to her. Within seconds, the radio at a nearby security podium crackled to life. Words she wasn't meant to hear spilled out anyway. Possible fraud at the front desk. Penthouse claim. Proceed. She stood motionless, watching the shift in the air. One clerk stiffened. The other whispered, "Should we lock the system?" Their eyes darted at her card as if it were contraband instead of currency. The manager leaned forward, his smile rehearsed and cruel. "We've seen this before. People come in, claim the highest suites, flash a fancy card, and disappear when the bank confirms it's fake. Not today." He slid the card into a drawer with exaggerated care, as though confiscating evidence. "Until this is verified, you're not a guest. You're a suspect." Around them, the lobby changed. A travel blogger perched on the velvet couch lifted her phone, recording quietly. A couple near the check-in line exchanged worried looks. The atmosphere wasn't luxury anymore. It was spectacle. And then the echo of boots. 2 security officers appeared, firm shoulders, blank faces. "Is there a problem?" one asked. "There is," the manager replied without hesitation. He pointed at her like a judge delivering sentence. "She's attempting access to restricted rooms under false identity." The younger officer hesitated, scanning her calm posture, but the elder didn't pause. "Ma'am, open your bag." Her fingers tightened slightly around the handle, not in fear, but in calculation. She set it down gently, the leather landing with a soft thud against the marble. One by one, her belongings were lifted out. A wallet, a phone, a key card. Each held up, examined, dismissed. "Nothing unusual," the younger officer muttered. "Check deeper," the manager snapped. "People like her always hide things." His voice carried across the lobby, slicing dignity from the air. The travel blogger's camera trembled. She whispered to her stream, "They're searching her like she's a criminal." Her voice wasn't loud, but the sentence stuck. A man near the concierge muttered, "This doesn't look right." Still, the search went on. Lipstick tube, sunglasses case, empty. Yet the performance continued, because humiliation was the point, not truth. Finally, the manager leaned back, folding his arms. "See? No reservation, no verification, no stay. Escort her out before she makes a bigger scene." The words dropped heavy, like a gavel, and just like that, the balance of power in the lobby tipped from suspicion into open accusation. But what none of them realized, not the manager, not the officers, not even the guests filming, was that every second of this escalation was a countdown. A countdown to the moment when silence would break and the tables would turn. The bag sat empty on the counter, its contents scattered like evidence of a crime that didn't exist. The officers waited for her protest, the outburst they'd been trained to expect. Guests leaned forward, hungry for a spectacle. The manager smirked, ready to twist every word against her. But she gave them nothing. Her shoulders stayed square, her breath even. Not once did her voice rise. Not once did she plead. She simply clasped her hands in front of her, as if she were standing in a boardroom instead of a lobby-turned-courtroom. "Ma'am, do you have anything to say?" the younger officer asked, his tone softer, unsure. Her eyes met his, calm, steady, a look that said more than any defense could. She didn't need to argue. She didn't need to convince. Her silence was its own verdict. The pause unsettled the room. Whispers grew louder. "Why isn't she fighting back?" a woman near the lounge whispered. A man replied, "Maybe she knows something we don't." The manager, irritated by the lack of panic, slammed the drawer shut. This is what guilt looks like. Quiet, waiting to be caught. But in truth, her quiet wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Years ago, she had learned that fury only fed the bias. At 23, when a loan officer told her she didn't look like a safe investment, she had raised her voice. The result? Security was called, her loan delayed. At 30, when a vendor accused her of forging a contract, she stayed silent. Within days, the truth surfaced, and the vendor lost his company. Silence had always been her sharpest weapon. It let others reveal themselves. And in this lobby, every slur, every insult, every careless word was being recorded not by her, but by the crowd gathering around. One guest raised his phone higher. Another whispered, "She doesn't even look scared." The travel blogger's stream ticked upward, comments scrolling, "She's too calm. Something's coming." The younger officer shifted uneasily. He placed the lipstick tube back into her purse and muttered, "Nothing criminal here." The manager snapped, "Don't be naive. People like her—" He caught himself mid-sentence, but too late. The words had already sliced through the lobby. Heads turned sharply, eyes narrowing at the tone, at the implication. Still, she said nothing. She lifted her chin just slightly, a gesture subtle but commanding. It wasn't defiance. It was patience. She was waiting for them to dig their own grave. And they were doing it perfectly. The silence she carried began to spread, like a weight pressing on every corner of the lobby. And in that silence, the witnesses found their voices. A young concierge, no more than 22, stood frozen near the side desk. She had seen the reservation log that morning. The name Carter was right there, tagged VIP, cleared for the penthouse suite. She remembered it clearly, but fear kept her quiet, at least for now. Across the room, Sophie, the travel blogger with her phone angled just enough to capture the scene, whispered into her live stream, "They're searching her bag like she's a criminal. This is... wow. We're at the Horizon Crown, downtown, and this is happening in real time." Thousands of comments lit up her screen, disbelief turning viral by the second. Near the velvet chairs, a couple from Chicago leaned closer. "She said her name was Carter," the husband muttered. His wife frowned. "That's on the reservation board. I saw it earlier when we checked in." Their words weren't loud, but the guests around them caught it. Murmurs spread like smoke. The younger officer, still uneasy, glanced at the crowd. He saw the phones, the whispering, the doubt forming against the manager's story. His hands trembled slightly as he handed her purse back. "Nothing here," he repeated under his breath, but the manager doubled down. "Don't be fooled," he barked, his voice sharp enough to slice through the growing discontent. "People like her are good at acting innocent. That's how they get in." That sentence landed heavy, too heavy. From the corner, a middle-aged guest stood, voice firm. "She gave you ID. She gave you a card. You took it. Now you're treating her like a suspect? That's not protocol, that's profiling." The air shifted. More phones rose. A teenager whispered to his mother, "Why are they doing this to her?" The mother shook her head, lips pressed tight. And then, finally, the young concierge stepped forward. Her voice shook, but her words were clear. "Her reservation is real. I saw it in the system this morning." Gasps rippled across the marble floor. The manager's face drained, then flushed. "Stay out of this," he snapped, eyes burning. "You don't know what you're talking about." But it was too late. The crowd had heard. The blogger's phone caught it all, the calm woman in red standing silent, the trembling employee speaking truth, the manager unraveling under the weight of his own arrogance. And in that moment, the lobby no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the witnesses. The words of the young concierge still hung in the air. "Her reservation is real. I saw it in the system this morning." For a moment, the lobby froze. The murmurs, the phones recording, the witnesses, everything pressed against the manager like a tide he couldn't stop. His jaw tightened, and instead of backing down, he lashed out. "You don't belong in the penthouse," he snapped, pointing directly at the woman in red. His voice was no longer polished. It was raw, desperate, spilling venom. "People like you don't belong in this hotel at all." Gasps cut through the marble hall. A child clutched his mother's hand tighter. A businessman near the elevator muttered, "Did he really just say that?" Still, she didn't move. Her silence was louder than his rage. The manager turned on the young concierge, his face flushed. "And you consider yourself finished? Spreading lies about guests? Undermining your superiors? You're lucky I don't have security drag you out, too." The junior employee shrank back, but not before several guests glared at the manager in open disgust. Sophie, still filming, whispered into her phone, "You're all hearing this, right?" He just threatened his own staff. The comments on her live stream exploded. "Unreal. Get him fired. She's too calm. She knows something." The elder security officer shifted uncomfortably, sensing the crowd turning. "Sir, maybe we should wait." "No," the manager barked. "She's done here. Escort her out immediately. Cancel the so-called reservation. This woman is a fraud, a thief, a stain on the Horizon Crown's reputation." Each word was a hammer strike, desperate to drown out the doubt spreading around him. But instead of silencing the lobby, his voice only amplified the injustice. A man near the lounge stood tall. "You can't just erase someone like this. We all saw her card. We all heard her name." The manager spun, his face sharp with fury. "And what makes you the authority here? She could have stolen that card. She could have hacked the system. Do you want this hotel overrun with scams?" His words echoed, but the echo was hollow. Guests shook their heads. Phones recorded every syllable. Even the younger officer stepped back, no longer convinced. And through it all, the woman in red stood silent, her chin lifted, her gaze unbroken. The manager sneered, his voice dropping into a hiss. "This isn't your world. You can play dress-up, you can bluff with fancy cards, but you'll never belong here." Not in my hotel. The irony cut sharper than he knew, for this was never his hotel. It was hers. The crowd shifted, a restless current rising against his authority. The tension was no longer simmering, it was boiling. And the next move, the next insult, would push it into eruption. The marble lobby was no longer quiet. It pulsed with tension, guests whispering, phones raised, disbelief buzzing like static. And then the line was crossed. "Cuff her!" the manager barked, his voice cracked with authority he didn't deserve. The elder officer hesitated, but the younger, pressured by command, stepped forward. With a snap of metal, the cold bite of handcuffs locked around her wrists. Gasps rippled through the room. A woman dropped her coffee. A child began to cry. The manager's smirk widened. Now it's clear. A thief caught red-handed. "On what grounds?" a man shouted from the lounge, his phone still recording. "On mine," the manager fired back. "This is my hotel, and I won't have it tainted by con artists." The irony of the claim struck like thunder, though no one yet dared to laugh. Phone zoomed closer. The travel blogger's stream lit up with furious comments. "This is profiling. Where's her lawyer?" "He's done for." The younger officer glanced at the empty purse, at the absence of evidence, then back at her face. She hadn't resisted, hadn't raised her voice, hadn't even flinched. And somehow, that unsettled him more than any protest could. "Walk her out," the manager demanded. "Through the front doors. Let everyone see what happens when fraud walks into the Horizon Crown." A chorus of protests broke out. "This isn't justice," one guest cried. "She showed you her ID," shouted another. Still, the order hung heavy, the officers shifting, unsure whether to obey the manager or their conscience. And then, the words that cut deeper than the cuffs themselves. "People like her always try to slip into places they don't belong." It wasn't whispered. It wasn't hidden. It rang across the lobby like a verdict. The young concierge covered her mouth, eyes wide with horror. Guests turned sharply, some lowering their phones just to process what they'd heard. A businessman shook his head. "That's not policy, that's prejudice." The woman in red lifted her chin, wrists bound, eyes steady. Her silence was no longer patience, it was power. Every insult, every word dripping from his mouth was now evidence, not against her, but against him. Still, the manager pressed on, desperate to solidify control. "Call the police," he snapped at the officers. "She's trespassing. Charge her, now." The elder officer reached for his radio, but his hand trembled. Around him, the lobby was no longer on the manager's side. It was a jury forming against him. And yet, in his arrogance, he didn't see it. He leaned close, his voice dripping with disdain. "Take a good look around. This is the last time you'll ever stand in a place like this." The woman said nothing, but the weight of her silence pressed harder than any scream. The breaking point had been reached, and what came next would change everything. The cuffs still gripped her wrists, but power was already shifting. Not in the steel, not in the hands of the officers, not in the smirk of the manager. Power shifted the moment she raised her voice, not loud, but deliberate. "Call Nia," she said, 2 words, calm and steady. The younger officer blinked. "Who?" She didn't answer him. Instead, she tilted her head, and from across the lobby, a guest caught the name. Sophie, the travel blogger, repeated it into her phone. She said, "Call Nia." "Who's Nia?" The live stream comments poured in. "Her lawyer. Her assistant?" "Something's about to happen." The manager scoffed. "What? Calling your friend to bail you out? Go ahead. Nothing can undo what you've done here." But even as he mocked her, she had already pulled her phone from her purse before it was emptied. It was still in her hand, her thumb pressing one button. A tone, soft but unmistakable, echoed through the marble space. On the other end, a voice answered instantly. Clear. Professional. "Miss Carter. Confirm status?" "Live incident," she said, each word sharp as glass. "Activate protocol." Guests froze. Officers exchanged uncertain glances. The concierge's eyes widened, recognizing the word. Protocol. Not personal, not casual. Corporate. The manager laughed, but the sound cracked at the edges. "What is this, some kind of performance?" "Timestamp every second," she continued into the phone, ignoring him. "Audit begins now." "Yes, ma'am," the voice replied. "System logging. Video feeds. Synced. Security override in standby." The younger officer stepped back, suddenly realizing this wasn't a scam. This was structure. This was authority. The crowd buzzed louder. Phones recorded closer. A man whispered to his wife. "She's not bluffing. She's someone. Still, the manager pressed on, desperate. None of this matters. She's a thief, and she's leaving in cuffs. But her eyes lifted, steady, unbothered. No, she said softly. The only one leaving is you. The words didn't need volume. They didn't need drama. They landed like a verdict, cutting sharper than any order he had given. Behind her, Sophie's stream exploded. Replay that! She just said he's the one leaving. Comments scrolled in. She's the owner. This is the twist. For the first time, the manager faltered. His smirk slipped. The officers froze mid-step. The lobby leaned forward, every witness waiting, sensing the tide had turned. The counterattack had begun. The marble floor seemed to hold its breath. The crowd leaned in, phones raised higher, streams buzzing with anticipation. The cuffs on her wrists no longer mattered. All eyes were fixed on the woman in red, the one the manager had just called a thief. She exhaled slowly, as if choosing the exact second to end the charade. Then she spoke. You've spent the last 10 minutes accusing me, she said, her tone calm, surgical. You've searched my belongings, you've called me a fraud, and you've humiliated me in front of every guest here. The manager crossed his arms, forcing a smirk, because that's exactly what you are. Her eyes didn't leave his. No, she said, voice sharpening like steel drawn from a sheath. I am the owner of this hotel. The room erupted. Gasps, shouts. A glass hit the floor somewhere in the back. The younger officer stepped back so quickly his radio nearly slipped from his belt. The concierge covered her mouth, eyes wide with vindication. The manager froze, color draining from his face. What? You heard me, she said. Every chandelier above us, every room in this building, every paycheck you've ever cashed, it all comes through me. And you chose to accuse me of theft in my own lobby. Phones captured every syllable. Sophie whispered to her stream. She's the owner. Oh my God, she owns the place. The chat exploded. Knew it! He's finished. This is unreal. The elder officer lowered his hand from his radio. Is this true? He asked, not to her, but to the trembling concierge. The young woman nodded quickly. Yes, her name was in the system this morning, executive-level clearance. I saw it myself. Gasps turned into murmurs of outrage. Guests shook their heads. A businessman muttered, I'll never stay here again if this is how they treat their own CEO. Her gaze never wavered. You thought silence was weakness, she said, each word deliberate. But silence was my warning. And now, your time here is over. The manager stammered, his voice cracking. You're lying. This can't be. But the evidence was already stacked against him. The system logs, the witnesses, the live streams flooding social media in real time. And above all, the unshakable authority in her voice. She raised her phone once more. Confirm identity, she said. On the other end, Nia's voice rang clear for everyone to hear. Confirmed. Aisha Carter, founder, CEO, and sole owner of the Horizon Crown Group. The lobby fell silent. No more whispers, no more doubt. Just the sound of the manager's breath catching as the weight of his mistake crushed him. The truth was out, and the tables had turned. The words, founder, CEO, and sole owner echoed through the lobby like a hammer strike. Silence fell, not the comfortable kind, but the suffocating quiet of people realizing they had just witnessed history, ugly, unforgettable history. The manager's smirk dissolved into something brittle, his jaw quivering as if searching for words that wouldn't come. His arms, once folded in smug certainty, now hung stiff by his sides. He tried to speak, but the sound that left his throat was thin, cracked. The younger officer took a full step back, lowering his eyes. The cuffs on her wrists suddenly looked like a trap that had just been sprung on the wrong prey. His partner unclipped the key with trembling fingers, shame written across his face. The click of the cuffs unlocking thundered louder than any applause. The young concierge, the one who had spoken up, stood straighter now. For the first time, confidence flickered in her posture. She wasn't the one on trial anymore, the manager was. Guests began to murmur louder, no longer whispers but declarations. She owns the place. They humiliated her in her own lobby. This is going viral. Phones tilted closer, capturing every angle of the man who had just sentenced himself with his arrogance. Sophie's stream was flooded with furious comments. Fire him! Justice served. This is insane. The viewer count ticked higher by the second. The manager tried again, words tumbling over each other. It's a misunderstanding. I I was only protecting the hotel's reputation. You mean protecting your ego? A guest cut in, his voice sharp. The crowd nodded, emboldened. Lauren, one of the clerks who had stood beside him earlier, paled. She looked at the ground, at the screen of her computer, anywhere but at her employer. She whispered almost to herself, We should have checked properly. You should have treated her with respect, another guest fired back. The once pristine authority of the staff crumbled. Their voices, their posture, their certainty, it all unraveled. They weren't gatekeepers anymore. They were defendants, standing trial in the court of public opinion. And presiding over that court was the very woman they had called a thief. She flexed her wrists, free now, her calm more commanding than ever. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to gloat. The scene itself was her victory. The manager's face went pale, sweat gathering at his temple. He tried to gather himself, to reclaim some shred of authority, but the more he spoke, the deeper he sank. This can be fixed, he muttered. We can handle this internally. No need to make it worse. But the crowd laughed bitterly. One guest held his phone higher. It's already out there. You made it worse the moment you called her a thief. The lobby was no longer his stage. It was hers, and everyone knew it. The manager's excuses dangled in the air, flimsy threads snapping one by one. His words no longer carried weight. They clattered to the marble floor like broken glass. And then, her voice cut through. Calm, precise, final. Terminated. The phone in her hand chimed softly, and Nia's voice answered instantly from the other end. Confirmed. Gregory Vance manager. Horizon Crown. Termination in process. Access credentials revoked. A second later, the manager's badge, still clipped proudly to his suit, beeped red. The lockout signal flashed. He stared down at it, blinking as if the plastic had betrayed him. No, wait, his protest cracked. He reached for the side door to the back office. The lock clicked, denying him entry. Guests gasped. Some laughed, the sound sharp with justice. Effective immediately, she continued, her voice steady, each word an execution. You are no longer employed here. You will not access Horizon Systems again. You will not represent this brand again. Consider this your final moment in this lobby. The younger officer stepped back fully, almost in relief. His partner exhaled slowly, shame etched across his features. The concierge nodded, vindicated. The crowd applauded, at first scattered, then swelling into a rhythm that filled the air louder than any order the manager had ever given. Lauren, the clerk, took a shaky breath. What about, she began. Her too, the CEO said, eyes fixed forward. Every staff member complicit in this humiliation is terminated. Effective immediately. Nia's voice over the line was crisp. Lauren Hayes, Kevin Patel, credentials revoked. Their badges, too, blinked red. Lauren dropped hers on the desk with trembling hands. Kevin muttered something under his breath, but the sound was lost in the rising tide of gasps and murmurs. It wasn't just termination, it was exile, clean and absolute. The manager fell back against the desk, pale, his authority stripped bare in front of the very guests he once lorded over. You think you can destroy me with this? He spat weakly, searching for dignity. She stepped forward, her heels echoing like a gavel against the marble. No, she said. You destroyed yourself the moment you mistook prejudice for power. Phones captured the moment from every angle. The red light of the badges, the collapse of false authority, the woman standing calm and unshaken. It wasn't a confrontation anymore. It was a verdict, and she had delivered it without ever raising her voice. The applause swelled, rising above the chandeliers, drowning out the sputters of the disgraced staff. Guests weren't just clapping, they were bearing witness. Their phones caught every second, every word, every face. By nightfall, the story would travel farther than the marble floors of the Horizon Crown. The manager sagged against the desk, his badge still glowing red, a brand of his downfall. The clerks stared at their own useless passes, realizing the doors that once opened for them were closed forever. And at the center of it all, the woman in red stood tall, unshaken. She didn't pace. She didn't raise her arms in victory. She simply let the silence reclaim the room, this time on her terms. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but it cut deeper than any shout could. You called me a thief in a hotel I own. You tried to erase me in front of strangers. And for 10 minutes, you thought your prejudice was stronger than my truth. Her eyes swept the lobby over the staff who had failed her, the officers who had cuffed her, the guests who had doubted, and the witnesses who had filmed. But justice doesn't need noise. Justice doesn't need permission. Justice simply arrives. She turned toward the young concierge, the only employee who had spoken up. Their eyes met, and for the first time that evening, a faint smile touched her lips. "Your integrity will not be forgotten," she said. The girl straightened, pride replacing fear. Then, to the entire room. "Let this be clear. Horizon Crown is not built on marble and glass. It's built on dignity. Anyone who strips that dignity from a guest strips it from this brand. And I will not allow it." The crowd erupted again, not just applause, but cheers. A man shouted, "That's leadership." A woman near the elevators wiped tears from her eyes. Sophie's stream comments scrolled too fast to read, but one message pinned itself at the top. "Silent revenge is the best revenge." The CEO lifted her phone once more. "Nia," she said. "Yes, ma'am?" "Log this incident, file it for legal, and send a reminder to every Horizon property. Discrimination is termination." "Already done," Nye replied. With that, she slipped her phone into her purse, flexed her freed wrists, and walked through the lobby, not escorted out, but escorted by the eyes of every witness who now saw her not as a suspect, but as the power she had always been. Her heels struck the marble like punctuation marks, each step declaring the same truth. She didn't need to prove herself. She simply was. And as the glass doors closed behind her, the lobby felt forever changed.